Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, in temperatures 40 degrees below zero, and deciding your only chance of survival is to cut your way out of your own tent and run into the darkness without your shoes. That is exactly what 9 people did on a mountain slope in Russia in 1959. They were experienced, they were prepared, they were not the kind of people who panicked, and yet something out there frightened them so badly that fleeing into a sub-zero wilderness, half-dressed, seemed safer than staying inside. Weeks later, search parties found their camp abandoned, their bodies scattered across the snow, and injuries so severe that one investigator compared them to a car crash. No one has ever fully explained what happened on that mountain. Tonight, we're going back to that night piece by piece to ask the question that still haunts investigators, scientists, and conspiracy theorists alike: what really happened at Dyatlov Pass? In late January of 1959, a group of 10 university students and experienced outdoorsmen set out from the Ural Polytechnical Institute for a skiing expedition into the northern Ural Mountains. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was known for meticulous planning. This wasn't a group of amateurs chasing thrills. These were seasoned hikers, trained in wilderness survival, aiming to reach a peak nicknamed Dead Mountain by the local Mansi people, who avoided it, believing it cursed. One member turned back early due to illness, unknowingly saving his own life. The remaining 9 pressed on, setting up camp on the slope of the mountain on February 1st. They wrote in their journals, joked, took photographs. Nothing in their final entries hinted at fear. Nothing suggested danger. And then communication stopped. When they failed to check in as scheduled, search parties were dispatched. What those searchers eventually uncovered would become one of the most debated mysteries in modern history. The search for the missing hikers began 3 weeks after they vanished. Rescuers trekked through brutal terrain, following faint ski tracks in the snow. What they found first was the tent, partially collapsed, half buried, and sliced open from the inside. Not the entrance flap, the side. Someone or something had made the hikers believe there was no time to unzip a door. Inside, their boots, coats, and supplies remained untouched. Everything they needed to survive the cold left behind. Footprints led away from the tent down the slope into the freezing dark. Some belonged to bare feet. Others were only in socks. In temperatures capable of causing frostbite within minutes, these experienced hikers had chosen to run into the night without proper clothing. Whatever drove them from that tent was not something they were willing to risk stopping for, not even to grab their boots. A little over a mile from the tent, searchers found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, lying beneath a large cedar tree, wearing only their underwear despite the freezing cold. The tree's branches were broken up to 5 meters high, as if someone had climbed it in desperation, perhaps trying to see something or escape something on the ground below. Nearby, the remains of a small fire suggested they had tried, briefly, to survive. Between the cedar and the tent, 3 more bodies were discovered in poses that suggested they had been trying to return to camp, as though realizing too late that leaving had been the fatal mistake. Investigators noted the positioning of the dead as deliberate, almost as if fear had frozen them mid-decision, caught between 2 impossible choices: the danger behind them and the cold ahead. It would take another 2 months until the spring thaw to find the remaining 4 hikers. They were buried beneath 4 meters of snow in a ravine farther down the slope, and their condition was far more disturbing than the others. One woman was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Another had massive internal chest fractures, the kind typically caused by a high-speed car collision, yet with no external bruising to explain it. A third had a fatal skull fracture. There were no broken bones from a fall, no signs of a struggle with another person, no defensive wounds. Whatever force crushed their chests and skulls, it did so without leaving typical marks of blunt human violence, as though tremendous pressure had come from something far larger, far heavier, or far stranger than a human attacker. The injuries alone might have suggested an avalanche, but the location told a different story. The bodies weren't buried under snow debris consistent with a slide. The slope's angle wasn't considered steep enough for one, and there was no evidence of disturbed snow indicating a slab avalanche at the time. Then came an even stranger detail. Testing on some of the hikers' clothing revealed elevated levels of radioactivity, far beyond what would be expected from natural background exposure. Soviet investigators offered no clear explanation. Was it contamination from a nearby weapons testing site? Residual exposure from their professions? Or something entirely unaccounted for? The official case file, when finally closed, gave a strange, almost dismissive verdict. The hikers died due to a compelling natural force. No further explanation was offered. The file was sealed. Witnesses were told to stop asking questions. In the years since, dozens of theories have tried to explain what happened that night, and the most widely accepted, at least officially, is a rare weather phenomenon called a katabatic wind. Cold, dense air rushing down the mountainside at hurricane force, potentially combined with an unstable slab of snow above the tent. Some scientists have proposed that this could have triggered a delayed, small-scale avalanche, one violent enough to cause the fatal injuries without leaving obvious debris. It's a compelling theory, mathematically modeled and taken seriously by researchers as recently as 2021. But it still doesn't fully explain the tongue removed with surgical-like precision. It doesn't explain the radiation. It doesn't explain why local Mansi tribespeople had long warned outsiders to stay off that mountain, calling it a place where 9 hikers had died before, according to old legend, and where, they said, an unknown force did not tolerate trespassers. Other researchers point toward infrasound, low-frequency sound waves generated by wind moving across the mountain's unique dome-shaped terrain. Infrasound, inaudible to human ears, has been linked in some studies to feelings of dread, panic, nausea, and irrational fear, even hallucinations. If the wind that night generated infrasound at just the right frequency, it's possible the hikers experienced an overwhelming, unexplainable terror, powerful enough to make them believe their only chance of survival was to escape their tent immediately, rationality abandoned entirely. It's a haunting idea that fear itself, born from nothing more than sound waves and wind, could be lethal. But skeptics note there's no way to prove infrasound was present that night, and it still fails to account for the crushing injuries or the radioactive clothing discovered on the bodies recovered from the ravine. Then there are the theories that refuse to stay within the boundaries of natural explanation. In the days following the disaster, other hikers in the region reported seeing strange orange spheres of light moving across the night sky near the mountain. Some witnesses at the time believed they were witnessing secret Soviet weapons tests, parachute mines, experimental rockets, or the fallout from a nearby classified missile program. Declassified documents have since confirmed that Soviet military tests did occur in the region around that period, though never publicly linked directly to the deaths. Could the group have witnessed something they weren't meant to see? Something that ended not with a single explosion, but with a wave of pressure, radiation, and unbearable primal fear? The government's swift closure of the case, the sealed files, the demand for silence, all of it has only deepened suspicion that the full truth was never meant to reach the public. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case, driven by decades of public pressure and unresolved questions. After a fresh investigation, prosecutors once again concluded an avalanche was the likely cause, this time citing improved snow slab modeling and terrain analysis conducted by Swiss researchers. Officials called the case closed, again. But for many who have studied Dyatlov Pass for years, this conclusion still feels incomplete. It cannot fully explain the missing tongue and eyes, injuries consistent with severe crush trauma without external avalanche impact, the radioactive readings, or why the group split into small clusters, moving in different directions rather than banding together as trained survivalists normally would. An avalanche might explain fear. It struggles to explain the specific, almost surgical strangeness of what was left behind. Perhaps the most unsettling part of this story isn't any single detail. It's how many separate, seemingly unrelated anomalies converge in one place on one night. A tent cut open from the inside, bare feet in the snow, broken ribs without bruising, a missing tongue, radioactive clothing, lights in the sky, local legends warning against the very mountain they chose to climb. Any one of these facts alone might be explainable. Together, they form a pattern that resists any single, tidy theory, natural or man-made. Maybe that's exactly why this case has endured for over 60 years, spawning documentaries, books, films, and endless late-night arguments. It isn't just a mystery about 9 deaths. It's a mystery about the limits of explanation itself. A reminder that even in an age of satellites, forensic science, and declassified files, some places on Earth still keep their secrets. Today, the site where the tent once stood is marked only by a small memorial plaque, visited by a handful of trekkers and researchers each year. The mountain, the Mansi once said, doesn't want people to know what happened there. Maybe that's just folklore. Or maybe some events are simply too strange, too layered, too far outside our frameworks to ever be fully resolved. No matter how much science or time or determination we throw at them, we want a single answer. An avalanche, a weapon test, a monster, a cover-up. But what if the truth is something we're not equipped to fully grasp, built from forces we don't yet have the language to describe? 9 people walked into the mountains that winter, certain of their skill, their preparation, their control over nature. Whatever met them there erased that certainty in a single night. And it leaves us, decades later, asking the same unanswerable question they may have asked themselves in their final moments. What is actually out there?